Usually when you see that marquee at the top of the video right there, State Farm agent Russ Forhis, that means it's time to smash it up on Warchant TV. But, schedules being what they are, international travel being what it is, he's Ira Schoffel, managing editor of Warchant.com. My name is Tom Lang. We figured we convene now that we're on East Coast time, Ira, the body clock from the 2014 College Football Playoff Committee. Ours might be back to a little bit closer to normal. It's time to take a breath with Florida State playing game 2 in just over 3 days. 3 days time. Hey man, how you doing? First of all, I kind of saw you for a little bit, fits and starts there, press box in Aviva Stadium, a little bit in Dublin, but how's it treating you back stateside now?
Good. Yeah, it was a whirlwind for sure. And then we stayed over a couple days afterwards. Kind of like the team. I think Mike Norvell had it in his mind that they get the nice win, get a day to do some sightseeing, and then come back. Didn't play out that way, but then they were still stuck there for a day, so they still did some sightseeing, but probably not the way that they had originally hoped. But yeah, man, just kind of it was really good this week to get back to Florida State practice in Tallahassee. Kind of some normalcy, and I think that was probably good for the team too. I just think that it's probably a lot to ask college football players to go overseas to play a football game. Most of those games have not been, by the way, most of those Ireland games have not been really competitive games. I think this was everybody we talked to there. So this was the first time it was really in a long time. It was really a good competitive game. The Northwestern Nebraska game was close, but I don't think anybody thought it was a good game. It was kind of ugly. Two teams playing poorly. This was a higher level of competition. And looking in hindsight, maybe not the best idea. From a scheduling standpoint, because it was a tough situation, but I think it's good for them to get back home.
Well, I mean, when you look at this game too, Ira, when it was scheduled, Florida State, Georgia Tech were in very different places. They were trending very different directions. But then as it plays out, I would say of the last, 24 weeks of college football where you could have Florida State and Georgia Tech meet up, boy, this is the worst possible one on the schedule for Florida State. Because if it was in late October, again, Florida State would know what it is with the replacements from year over year. And it was a tough set of circumstances, but still Florida State had the better roster. And that's where the disappointment comes in. And I think, one of the things that you and I often talk about on our own time, whether we're, it could be on the record with a smash or, if we're just walking outside of a press box or a practice or texting back and forth, we can be pretty blunt. And that was not what we expected to see. Certainly, we knew that Georgia Tech's offensive line was going to be pretty good, but we thought in the end, Florida State would win up front when you combine the two things together, the offensive line, the defensive line. It just simply didn't happen. They got beat by a better team that day, which I didn't know that was kind of possible, but that's how it played out in Dublin.
Yeah, and when you say better team, you're saying a team that executes its plan better,
yes,
that operates better, for sure, that kind of maximizes their abilities. They certainly did a better job of that. After in the post-game wrap that Corey and I did, I was pretty strong worded that I thought Florida State's a much better team, and they had to do a lot of things wrong to lose that game. And I was kind of glad to hear Mike Norvell basically admit that as this week has gone on. After the game immediately, he gave a lot of credit to Georgia Tech, and he should. That's the right thing to do. But I think he's been pretty blunt about the fact that they feel that they played poorly, and even playing poorly, Georgia Tech playing well, and everything kind of lining up the way they needed it in terms of the pace of the game, in terms of not turning the ball over, in terms of the weather kind of coming in and wetting the field a little bit. Like everything really played into Georgia Tech's favor, and you still lost on a walk-off field goal by 3 points. So, I think that speaks to the disparity of talent. And again, I made this comment when I was talking to Aslan. This is Ira Schoffel overexposure week here at warchant.com. But when I was on my wake up filling in for Corey with Aslan yesterday, I made the comment that, excuse me, you'd much rather be in Florida State shoes than Georgia Tech shoes. Like Georgia Tech's, their ceiling is still, I think, maybe I'll be proven wrong. Come back and at me in 3 or 4 months. I think they're going to be a 7-5-ish team. I think that maybe an 8-4 team. I don't think their ceiling is much higher than that. Florida State's ceiling, I think, is still really, really high. I think it's still playoff caliber. But on that day, obviously Georgia Tech was the better team. And I think you'd rather be the team with the higher upside that has to figure some stuff out than the team that has figured out what they've got, but I don't know how much their upside is.
Yeah,
That's why I'm looking at it.
yeah. For me, I think and it's going to play out. Georgia Tech's got a really tough schedule too, especially the
Yes,
back half of that schedule.
right. I
You
mean,
know,
they could be 6-6.
yeah, they need to rack up wins in the front half of the schedule. To me, if they can play from in front or if it's within touch, that offense is going to be really annoying and tough to beat. But in terms of getting stops,
Yeah.
but if they get down by a score or two and they have to
Or get
chase,
off schedule, yeah, for
man,
sure.
Haynes King is going to run up the score going the other way because we saw some of the bad throws he made, and that's on brand for him. Unfortunately, he made a couple of really good plays too. This isn't about sour grapes with Georgia Tech.
No,
This is about how Florida State somehow, some way looked like the worst football team that day. And so, where in the gap do we assign? You could use the word blame, but the reasons and where do they need to move forward, and where do they need to fix? And is it some disconnect between the coaches and the players? Is it about being fired up as a football team ready to go and playing downhill and more aggressive? Is it about preparation? Is it about trusting your training and your technique, as Mike Norvell was talking about? As we're looking forward to Boston College, Ira, I wonder, first of all, your thoughts on, like, when you walked out of Aviva, what went wrong in your mind? What do they do wrong, and what did you want to see improved? And then you got to see practice on Thursday, the first one that was open to the media after they returned to the States. Did anything seem different in the way maybe the coaches messaged things, the way the players handled practice? Kind of take us through that journey from Saturday night all the way to here.
well, I think for the biggest picture on Saturday night, like it just dawned. I knew it going in. Like one thing I knew going in, I said this to several people that would ask me questions, like at the meet and greet that we did in Dublin on Friday, that the one thing we didn't know about this team, and there's no way any of us could know, was we had never really seen them play in a game situation. This particular team,
Yeah.
Last year's team was very different, and again, it's a few people that just kind of get under your skin. But for the people who are like, you guys always lie in the offseason. Like last offseason, we told you that was going to be a great football team, and they were a great football team. We were not wrong about that. But the difference was this year, you've got so many guys who we had never seen in game situations. Like I was telling somebody Friday at that get together that I think Marvin Jones Jr. athletically is as impressive as anybody I've ever covered. He's a phenom physically, but I've never seen him play in a football game where he's gotten punched in the mouth and the other team's doing well, and now he's got to react to that. We've never seen any of that with that football team. So to me, that was kind of like the jarring thing at that game was, okay, well, what happened here? Why did these guys not respond? Why were they not more aggressive? Why were they the less aggressive team, the more tentative team, and all those things? I would say, now that we've been around talking to some people, watching, listening to the words of Mike Norvell and Adam Fuller and some of the staff, I feel like, and maybe this is a little bit of hopium, but I think it's true. I think you had a combination of maybe guys thinking too much because I don't know whether, and it's hard to know for sure whether it's they were too much was piled on them, too many instructions, too many look out for this, don't look out for that, watch for this, those types of things. Maybe there's some of that. Also, you don't know how, this coaching staff, this is their first time in a game with these players. So they didn't know how those guys were going to act. I'm not trying to make excuses. I just think there are a lot of variables that we didn't have with last year's team. And, that speaks to this whole topic. I know you and Jeff have talked about some, but like the challenge with, overhauling a team with portal guys and then asking them to play right away is you're not going to have that experience. Like, if it's a guy that's been in your system for 3 or 4 years, by the time like they get to that point, you know what they are. I don't know if they knew how Jaylen Brown was going to play a receiver. I don't know if they knew how Devontae Brown was going to look at safety, they knew how they play in drills, but it's different when you go into a game. So I think that to me is, I believe they now have a much better baseline of, okay, this guy we need to give less information to, or these guys, this segment group, we need to do whatever. I think it's more about that than it did cause me to readjust what I think about the talent level of this team. That's kind of where I'm at.
Well, yeah, I think Nick Saban knows what he's looking
Right.
at. He says that a group looks to be the part of a top 5 roster, has enough size and strength and speed and all that kind of stuff. There's no doubt. The question is about reckless abandon, the way they play with, the preparation level. Because here's the thing is, I get it. Georgia Tech, so many returners, especially on offense. That's a brand new defense they were breaking in with, a brand new coordinator, but they had a plan. They got downhill. They played more aggressive. And that's where I get frustrated personally is you guys are on level footing. You traveled out the same day. It's not week 6 and one of you's coming off of a bye and a cake schedule, and the other one just went through a murderer's row for 2 straight weeks and they're back on the road. This is even footing, and you see one side of the football field, one sideline, guys coming off and playing with their hair on fire, and the other one just looking like what comes next, and they're thinking through it. Now, the information that you're talking about, Ira, they have it. They have it. It was a costly data set to acquire from week 0, but they have it now. And so the question to me is, what does it look and feel like on Monday night against Boston College? Because I expect to see a team that plays a lot more downhill, that plays physically. And Adam Fuller was speaking in his weekly press conference. The first thing he said, which really raised my eyebrows, was we have an excellent strength and conditioning program. We have people that we believe are powerful, athletes. They're powerful players. Right. They need to play like it.
Right.
Boy. Now that is a very kind way of telling me and telling you and the people that they're going to peel the paint off of the walls when he decides to talk to his defense, or he already had, that you guys just need to get downhill and play tougher and just whip somebody's butt at some point. Like, Georgia Tech could have gone this way or that way, but sometimes you just need to beat the man in front of you and give him fewer options. That's what it sounded like to me from Adam Fuller, is that he felt let down by the fact that the players didn't play as tough as he expected them to play and just win their one-on-ones.
Yeah, and I think the what I would say when you compare, like, well, why was Georgia Tech able to do it and Florida State was not? Well, Georgia Tech was facing a Florida State offense that wasn't really clicking. Yeah. Florida State's defense had the unenviable task of going up against a Georgia Tech offense that knew exactly what they were doing and felt very good about it and had a good game plan, had an offensive line that was experienced and gelled. A really good running, that the skill, the core players, quarterback, running back, tight receivers, like those guys have been in the system. So Florida State's defense is, piecing it together against an offense that's going to be clicking at a high rate, whereas Georgia Tech's defense was kind of having a mud fest against Florida State's offense. Like, both Georgia Tech's defense, I don't think was great, but Florida State's offense wasn't great either. And then when Georgia Tech brought numbers, which is not a scheme situation or a guy's executing. It's just the numbers are the numbers. Florida State didn't do a good job of picking it up or diagnosing it. And that's, again, you have a new quarterback, new running backs who struggled sometimes in pass protection. All those things kind of factor together. And I think if Florida State was in a better position to make them pay, and if they made them pay once or twice, it maybe changes how Georgia Tech plays defense. But they really couldn't make them pay until that one, drive when they hit the 4th down throws. So again, I just think it was I'm not saying a perfect storm, but I just think a lot of things lined up. And then the other thing, when you made the comment about Adam Fuller and started to ramble, but the comments he made about the physicality, again, I think he pointed to the 3 of the reasons that happens. And I think he's 100% right. It's guys that either, were not confident in what they were doing or not trusting their eyes, or it's guys who were, just resorting to bad technique once you get into a game where it's not going the way you thought. I think everybody on that team, and this is ultimately, this lays at Mike Norvell's feet, and I think it's why he's so upset about the loss, is, they did not expect Georgia Tech to be in that game in the 3rd and 4th quarters. And when they were, I think you saw guys lose a lot of their fundamentals and techniques, and then you saw the result of that. So, again, I think it's all intertwined, but I don't think it's a matter of this team doesn't have toughness about it. I think there are dudes, we see the collisions. You've been at practice. You've seen, offensive line. You've seen a Maurice Smith have to take Darrell Jackson running full speed into his chest and then go to war. That's not soft, right. They've got some toughness. It just didn't show up in that game.
Correct. And one dude who's not soft at all is State Farm agent Russ Voorhis. State Farm agent Russ Voorhis, who is sponsoring this here video. He sponsors the Smash on Warchant, but you'll also be seeing him and his presence on more videos here on Warchant TV. He serves the entirety of the state of Florida, Georgia, and also Alabama. If you live in any of those states, anywhere as far north as they go. Russ Vorhis has you covered. Head to russvorhis.com, russvorhis.com today for more information. You can see the phone numbers if you're watching here on Warchant TV. This also is on the pod feed. The Jacksonville Beach number I'll give you, 904-834-4282. I am now a customer of State Farm agent Russ Vorhis. His staff is first class. Try out either of those phone numbers that you'll find at russvorhis.com. He has you covered head to toe. Ira knows it. He's one of the OGs of Florida State in terms of supporting Warchant, supporting the university athletic department. Anywhere you can support Florida State, Russ Vorhis says, where do I sign up, Ira? And that's how devoted he is.
Yeah, and if you call him, if you get him on the line, you could probably commiserate about that game because I can guarantee you Russ Vorhis was not happy about that game either. But if you do give them a call or ask for a quote or information on their website, or go in the office, mention that you saw it on Wake Up or not Wake Up Warchant. You can mention Wake Up Warchant, or you can mention the Jeff Cameron Show. Just mention warchant.com and the Smash. I was going to say Smash, but it's not the Smash. But mention Warchant. He likes to hear that because he likes to help other Noles, and he'll be happy to help you guys out.
Many of you out there have mentioned Warchant. It's so much so that when I mentioned it myself on the phone, the guy says, "Oh God, we get calls from you people all the time." I'm like, "Yeah. What do you mean, you people? You mean great customers is what you mean." So, Ira, you're right. They don't practice soft at Florida State. They don't. I get that. But unfortunately, what you saw, like those battles between Maury Smith and Darrell Jackson, you just didn't see that on either side of the trenches nearly as much, specifically as it related to the defensive line. It's not you brought up Jackson, so he's one player that I would mention. But it's just that's where the disconnect between what you might see on a Tuesday in camp versus on a Saturday in game one. That's where Mike Norvell's responsibility lies. That's where the $10.5 million comes in. That's where the big bucks are paid is how do you clean that up? And if there was a miscalculation that you don't think that Georgia Tech can hang with you for 35, 40 minutes, and I hope there's a recalibration that comes from that this point forward. It's not always on the player. Sometimes that miscalculation could be on the head man. I would expect to see a group that plays very hard on Monday night. And I would also be very, very interested, and I can't wait. Gene Williams, Ira, releases the Pro Football Focus grades the day after the game on warchant.com on the message boards. But one of the most important stats there is the snap count tracker. How many plays did guys participate in? And you get a breakout. I'm looking at defensive line. I'm looking at linebacker. I'm looking at running back, to name just 3 positions. But you could really go a lot of different places and say, I wonder how much this backup is going to play relative to that week 0 starter. Would you look first to defensive line? Where would you go first with what you might be interested in seeing in terms of any changes in personnel who might get an expanded role?
Yeah, and going back to kind of meshing those two things you just brought up, I just want to kind of tie them together. And when I say I don't think that they thought Georgia Tech could hang with them, I don't think Mike Norvell or his staff ever expressed that to the players. I don't think that was ever something that they let seep into the locker room as like a talking point, like, oh, we're going to dispatch of these guys. But I think when you make some of the decisions they made about rotations, and when you aren't specifically focused on matchups and getting this guy the ball and doing, for example, Mike Norvell talked about it on Wednesday. Jalen Lucas should have played more in that football game. Adam Fuller talked about Sione Lolohea should have played more in that football game. Well, then as a reader or a listener or a media member, yes, well, how does that happen? Well, that happens to me, in my opinion, when you're not looking at a game as if we need to take advantage of every possible edge we can get to win this game. And to me, the next step of that is, well, you thought you were just going to win the game. You didn't have to do that. And I think going forward, certainly in this week, I think you're going to see a much more intentional approach to who plays. And Mike Norvell said this. I believe it was him or Fuller. I think it was Norvell said, like, they're going to be much more intentional about who plays when and where and how much. And I think we're going to see that in this game. And as far as specifics, I definitely think linebacker for sure. I think my guess is you're going to see maybe a starting 5 offensive line play multiple series. Now that would be a little bit of a departure. They have rotated linemen in the past. The difference to me, the reason I don't think you need to do it right now is because you do have that depth. To me, 2 years ago or a year ago or 3 years ago, I felt like it made sense to do that to get guys some reps in case you need them.
Yeah.
Like if Robert Scott goes down, you need Bless Harris to have gotten some snaps, or you needed, whoever, a backup Bryson Estes or whatever. You need to get some guys some snaps in case they're needed, or Darius at center or whatever. This is not that situation. You've got guys that have played a lot of football. Robert Scott didn't need to be in there to get some snaps. Same thing with, whether it's Keandre Jones or TJ Ferguson, whoever is going to be your guys. I think it makes sense to stick with those. So that's another one. Defensive line, I think the defensive line rotation is what it is. I don't think it's going to change much. I think you're just going to see those guys play better. Now, they did say you'll see more of Sione Lolahea. And I think that's possible, and it probably is true. I don't think it's going to be a huge departure, though, because I still think they think Marvin Jones and Patrick Payton are their two best defensive ends, and we'll see. I mean, Thomas Castellanos is more of a space guy than Hayes King, so I don't know that Sione Lolahea out on the edge with Thomas Castellanos is a your dream. So we'll see how it all plays out. But I still think the overall top 8 guys on that defensive line are who they are, and they'll still play.
I would like to see, yeah. I just wonder about maybe the distribution. Like, the characters might be the same, but maybe Daniel Lyons gets a couple more snaps if they don't get the return that they like in the early part of the game. I think it's more fluid now. I think this coaching staff got bit a little bit, like you're talking about. If you're Mike Norvell, that you can rotate a lot of guys, maybe get a lot of guys game action, and you could put sub packages in and things like that. I'm not saying you're sowing the seeds of complacency, but what I'm saying is that you believe that you are prohibitively a better football team, and when you get bit for that, man, you can't do that again. It's infuriating on the fan side. That's infuriating to me. Like, I can believe that, but damn it, dude! Like, if you see it in the second or the third quarter that this thing is not the way you thought it was going to be, and maybe you still want to run the football, but it's proving so far that you cannot run the football with consistency, maybe you take a couple more shots early instead of running the ball on a 3rd and 9 and forcing a 4th and long throw to Ja'Kai Douglas. Maybe you shrink up that rotation. I think the lesson is learned. I hate that it had to be learned, and it's infuriating that it needed to be, because Georgia Tech played just better. They just played better that day for 60 minutes. But at some point, you do need to turn the page. And I think Florida State wishes the game was on Saturday and not Monday, so they could turn the page a little bit sooner for game 2. The circumstances in this case, Ira, while they might have benefited Georgia Tech in a huge way out in Dublin, if you're talking about intangibles and timing, this is Boston College first game of the season. They've got a brand new coach. They've got some pieces, especially a quarterback who can give you headaches. But he's got to learn a new scheme. There's a whole lot of overhaul going on in Chestnut Hill, and they have to get on a plane, come down here to play a very pissed off bunch of Florida State Seminoles. So this should be, I'm not talking about betting spreads. I'm not talking about anything like that. This should look like a far, far different football team in Florida State than what Boston College may have gotten if, let's say, Florida State won 40-10 in week 0.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I think if Florida State had cruised through that opener, you would have looked at this game as you could see Florida State kind of sleepwalk maybe a little bit. Not that the coaching staff would tolerate it. They would definitely push them in practice, but you could see that being the challenge. Yeah, man, this should be an inspired effort from this football team. Those guys, man, and you asked before about seeing them at practice on Thursday. I thought it looked like a team that was not how to describe it? Like, I don't want to say like not happy, but like it's not like they were like everybody was walking around stomping and fuming and spitting fire, but you could tell everybody on the team is very upset with how they played. And so it manifested in a few different ways. You saw, I wrote about it on the website. People can read it at warchant.com. I saw Maurice Smith getting onto other veteran offensive linemen when he wasn't happy with the way a certain play was run. And then when that lineman pushed back, Maurice kept going after him, which is not something you see a ton of. I mean, that's kind of a new thing, not that Maurice is not a good leader, but he's not the most vocal guy in the world. And I thought it was good to see him do that. I saw some position coaches and Mike Norvell, they're always pretty hard on those guys, but it seemed like there was a little bit more pointed emphasis, and that's, coming off of a loss. And so, it just feels like this is a team that when you say that there should be an angry or pissed off team, I think that's accurate, but it's not like they were just like all running around trying to kill each other. I do think a few scout team guys got banged up a little bit more than usual today at practice. There was a little bit more physicality for some scout team players. I don't know if they bargained for, but yeah, man, they got to play well. I mean, there's no, that for every reason that was a bad spot. And we started off the show talking about that. It was a bad spot for Georgia Tech, and that's not excuse making. We all thought this before the game. It was going to be a tough spot. We just thought the margin for error was so big that it wouldn't matter at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Turns out, they played worse than we expected. But with this game, yeah, man, it's Boston College. You're at home. They've got a new coaching staff. Yes, BC has some weapons, but Trayshawn Ward is over there now as well. And you got to think he'll be highly motivated to play in Doak Campbell Stadium for the first time in a couple of years. But yeah, I mean, this is a game that if they're what Mike Norvell thinks they are, this should be a game they get under handle pretty quickly and control. And if they don't, then man, he's got to do a whole lot of soul searching because the physical talent is there. It's there. It's verified by how fast they run, how big and strong they are. It's now, did you get the right guys as football players? And if they don't play well Monday, that would be a really, really bad sign.
Yeah,
I don't expect it though.
I don't either. Like the one thing I'll allow for is if it's an uneven start, because sometimes when you try to overcorrect things,
Right.
You're a little bit out of line. So like if the first few drives, I'm not saying it's 10-0 Boston College or anything like that. I'm just saying like if it looks a little bit disjointed, I kind of understand the human nature of that. It's almost like you want to undo the pass, and clearly this team has to learn, the hard way. They've already have in one measure, but I wouldn't expect them to just be able to fix it. If they do, it almost makes me more mad about game one. But that's the hard part of trying to remove the taste from your mouth. What I would anticipate, Ira, is a group that doesn't look flat. That's the way I'll put it. They just, for big swaths of the game in Aviva. I'm not saying the entirety of it. First drive was beautiful, was on script. I think they were very, very close to a couple of home run plays in the second drive and the third drive offensively when they were on the field that maybe some circumstances don't go their way. But
and there's a few plays on defense that they're that close to making.
Right.
And either Hayes King just makes them, I'm not saying a miracle throw, but for him, probably a miracle throw.
Yeah.
And, they could have changed. And any of those stops, or they fall on the loose ball, the fumble. I mean, any of those things, I think, put Georgia Tech in a situation they don't want to be in. And you may end up winning that game by 21 points. I thought that was still on the table at halftime.
It could have been, yeah. I think one or two key things might have changed it, but I don't want to be Jimbo where it's like this one's out of the gate, that one's out of the gate.
Right.
You gotta execute in those moments and either fall on the football or seal the block or not fall down when you're gonna. Man, the one Morlock thing where he fell and he's lead blocking out to the right, that one pissed me off because there was a lot of room there. But that I'm not going to fall into that trap. Damn it! I just said don't fall into that trap because you should be making so many of those plays that should you miss 3 or 4, you're still going to win the football game. And that's what I'm expecting to see here, Ira. And I think that's what the fans want to see is, of course, a win first. But don't look flat. Look inspired to be playing. And what you're saying is there's going to be a balance between looking at that as a player's mentality versus a player's thought process. Like, if perhaps they're thinking too much and there's paralysis by analysis going on at the snap versus a will to win or a will to play. That's what we're going to have to discover here over the next few games is what's what. Was it about simplicity of what they were looking to do, or was it about that they walked off the bus thinking that they were just big, bad Florida State and by showing up they were going to beat Georgia Tech on that Saturday?
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I was talking to somebody, a friend off the air about, physicality and that kind of thing, and he was saying, well, you can't really, you either have that or you don't. Here's the thing: there have been players at Florida State that were not tough that played a lot of football. We've seen it on both sides of the ball, where you'd say, man, that kid's a really good athlete, not that tough, but maybe he was so skilled or he was on a bad team or whatever, what the case was. There's a bunch of the dudes on this team that did not play very physically in that football game, but I've seen them do it. I know they've done it. They've done it in games. They've done it in practices. They did not do it that day. So to me, that gives you more, it's not like you're saying, okay, we've seen these guys for the first time. They're not a physical football team. So that's what they are. A lot of these guys, we have seen them do it. And I think that's one of those contagious things too. And it's just being the more aggressive team. And I think once you start losing and the game's not going the way you expected it to be, and now guys don't want to make mistakes. And I just think it kind of snowballed on them. Again, I'm not making excuses for what happened that night, but just trying to explain why we can sit here and think it may look completely different on Monday with a lot of the same players.
Yeah, agreed. Well, I think also a situation like this, Ira, helps cultivate voices in the locker room. Like you just pointed out, Maurice Smith. Now Maurice has been here forever, but he's not a loud guy. I mean, you know that. I know that from seeing practices. And when you watch games, you're not worried about Maurice Smith getting flagged for 15 for a late hit. That's not his style. But sometimes when it hits the fan, different dudes speak up and they're like, all right, enough of this now. And I just wonder if maybe you see some of those things develop on the field when everybody gets able to observe it outside of practice on Monday against BC. But I mean, I never expected, Ira, that in the home opener you'd feel up against it. But they are. I mean, I think it's fair to say that Mike Norvell loves the word response. You kind of have to have it this time around, because if you don't get it, the soul searching is on, like you put it.
And one other thing I want to mention, just kind of going back to the mindset of that game and why I feel like a lot of that was an aberration. This is something that, at the time, I didn't notice it. And then later that night, I thought about it. I was like, did they do that? So at halftime, they didn't do the normal Mike Norvell brings the whole team together and talks to them on the field.
Oh, yeah.
And so I didn't think about it at the time. And then later that night, I was like, I don't remember them doing that. But then I didn't really give it much more thought. Well, Shaheem brought it up today that was one of the times where he felt like some guys did stand up as leaders, because when they went in the locker room, what happened was everybody got so excited about Fitzgerald hitting the long field goal. And so many of these players are new that everybody just started going to the locker room, kind of celebrating Fitzgerald's field goal, and they all just go in the locker room. Well, Norvell is used to doing his thing on the field.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know how important that 2 minutes is or 90 seconds and for people that haven't been to games at home, you've probably never seen it, or a Florida State game in person, you maybe never see it. At the end of the first half, the entire team crowds around Mike Norvell, and then he gives them some comments about the first half, and it's like a minute, half, 2 minutes. And then nobody else says a word. He just says what he wants to say. Then they go in the locker room. They do it at every single game. They didn't do it in this game, and I think it speaks to two things. Number one, excuse me, the fact that so many of these guys are new and didn't. I mean, I know they rehearsed it when they did their game scrimmage, where they kind of practice what they do on game day, but clearly it's not ingrained. And then the other thing, I think it spoke to how distracted and disjointed kind of they were as a team that day.
Yeah, and there's a lot to be distracted about, but it all comes back to, and this is where Mike Norvell is very good about taking accountability in these situations. He was in the post game. He was especially so in his Wednesday press conference this week. It all comes back to him. Whatever the reason, that's okay. I don't like that the count's 0-1 right now, but this is a big at bat now. It's a big pitch coming up. You better smash this thing. And no pun intended for the show that we're usually on with State Farm agent Russ Voorhees, but this is a big one. Everybody will calm the hell down, Ira, just a little bit if they respond and they pummel Boston College, or at least if it's not a pummeling on the scoreboard, they control it and they look like they have a clue and they win in the trenches a little bit more, and they show downhill. So I'll close it out with this. Your thought: the thing you want to see most on Monday night from Florida State is what?
I'm going to echo my guy, George Henshaw, Coach Henshaw's house that ran earlier this week. And I thought he was pretty blunt about some of his assessments about the team. And the biggest thing he said he wanted to see was collisions. Collisions delivered by Florida State players, and I'm with him. I think Mike Norvell's going to scheme up some stuff on offense. I think when he looks back at that game and realizes that he didn't maybe, that first drive was beautiful. But as the game went on, I don't know if he was looking for mismatches and really looking to exploit. If he was, I think Jalen Lucas is in the game more. And I think, they get some other guys certain touches. I think you get Morlock some touches. I mean, I think you figure out a way to use your guys that have advantages, size, speed, or skill against the guys covering them. So I think that's going to take care of itself. But really, man, I just want to see them play physically, and even if not to say like reckless abandon, but yeah, man, like deliver some hits, make people pay. ball carriers, make, guys trying to take on blocks, guys trying to pull and get in your face. I mean, they need to be blowing plays up. They need to, again, I think you and Jeff talked about this week is sometimes, it's the line gets reset one way or the other sometimes. And it's either the offensive line's resetting it or the defensive line's resetting it. And that affects how the linebackers and everybody else can play. And you want to see them do that. They've got the ability, they've got the size, they've got the strength. And nobody believes it right now. I think they have the physicality to do it. And so I'm looking forward to seeing that more than anything. I think the offense will take care of itself. I think Mike Norvell will use their speed and some talent against BC's defense to exploit some things. I want to see that physicality and just the collisions on defense.
I want to see some definition of some dudes. I just want to know who they are. I want to know who they trust, because I think when you talked about it, rotations, and there's a difference between rotating guys on the defensive line and bringing in a bunch of different skill position players, Ira, or rotating offensive linemen, 3 at a time like that. Some of that's more than just, the normal course of a game rotations. I want to see some dudes defined. It's so hard to break down that game when you're asking about skill position players. Like, how do you think Roydell played? I thought he started great, but I don't know. I mean, it's he goes a half an hour without touching the ball at a couple points of the game. So Toafili, I thought he was awesome when he was given the ball. But again, Keziah Holmes got his own drive. That's my guy, but he got a drive, and it's like you don't see him again. And right. Cam Davis made a few cameos and had a couple plays drawn up for him. Receivers, Kentron made a nice catch. Malik made a nice catch on when you had to have it on a 4th down. Ja'Kai was their best receiver, but I don't know. Jaylen Brown, Darion, it's tough. I want to see some dudes defined, Ira. I want to know at the end of the game, like, okay, when push comes to shove, they trust this dude in this situation, and that goes for both sides of the ball.
Yeah, and it was accentuated because of the lack of possessions in that game. Yep. If you're in a possession where you're getting into 70 plays, 80 plays, then it's not as big a deal. But when you're in the 50s, and that, and again, they didn't know how the game was going to play out. But I think you could have guessed that it might play out that way because of how slow you were going to go, and what Georgia Tech, their path to victory was going to be the same.
Yeah. So now we have all of you covered right here on warchant.com. You can head over to warchant.com. It's a weird week. Again, the weekend is kind of the lead up to game day. And so everything is off by a few days. It's been that way since Dublin, everybody. We're going to get back on schedule after this Boston College game is over. But it doesn't matter. If it's a day that ends in Y in football season, we've got you covered at warchant.com. The web special, as always, code FSU and the number 1 for 2 months for just $1. FSU1, 2 months for $1. And, of course, hit the like button underneath this video. Subscribe to Warchant TV. And if those of you are listening on the podcast, thanks again for checking out this particular episode brought to you by State Farm agent Russ Forhis. Head over to warchant.com or Warchant TV for more great coverage. For Ira, my name is Tom. Remember, head to the website. Game days on a Monday. Maybe during halftime of watching those games on Saturday, you read Ira's latest or what's going on with recruiting with Michael Langston. We'll talk to you next time right here on Warchant TV.